But we'll go ahead and get started. We'll be mindful of time and we'll welcome folks as they also join us this morning. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, thanks so much for being here. My name is Zozan Kuchikaiden. I'm with the Pennsylvania Coalition to Advance Respect, a division of Respect Together. Again, thanks for being here today. And before we get started, we just want to review some housekeeping items. Taylor, if you wanted to mention about the credits.
Sure, I absolutely can. So, good morning. I neglected to say that I am Taylor Takeman. I am a youth development coordinator with our ECHIA program at the Center for Schools and Communities. And just as a reminder that if you need Act 48 credits, those are available for today's session. And I'll drop an evaluation link in closer to the end of our webinar so that you can complete that and access your 48 credits. And then just a quick note that our webinar session today is created by individual providers and that the opinions presented herein do not necessarily represent the official stance or policies of the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and no official endorsement by PD should be inferred. So I'll pass it back over to you, Suzanne. Thank you.
Definitely. And then also this webinar is being recorded and it will be accessible on CSC's website alongside the screening toolkit. And the screening toolkit will be put in the chat here for your review. Taylor, if you'd like to pop that in the chat, just throughout the webinar a couple times if it kind of gets, buried with other chat messages, just so folks can review, or if you'd like to reference it throughout the training, you can do that as well. And then we will be holding questions and comments until the end of the webinar. But of course, as you think of questions, please use the chat icon to post your questions so we can review them later. And then again, we all know Taylor. Thank you so much for your help here. She will be monitoring today's session. So if you need any other assistance or if you have technical issues, we also have Michael here with us. So please feel free to send them a chat as well. And if you have not done so already, please rename yourself with your first and last name, just so we can identify you on the Zoom attendance account. And then lastly, although many of you are very seasoned in this field, this webinar will cover some difficult content, so please take care of yourself and of course take any time that you might need. So with that said, welcome to Educator Essentials, Screening and Responding to Youth Human Trafficking with CSC's new toolkit. Again, thanks so much for having me. For those who may have just joined, I'm Zozan Kuchikaiden. I'm the Anti-Human Trafficking Services Coordinator with the Pennsylvania Coalition to Advance Respect, or PCAR. And so today we'll really do a deep dive into how schools can identify, screen, and respond to youth who might be experiencing human trafficking or exploitation. We're so excited to have had the opportunity to collaborate with CSC to develop a trafficking screening toolkit. This resource has been months in the making. And of course, this project would not have been possible without the support from CSC. So, we're really thankful for that. And I'm glad that we could collaborate. And I hope that you all find this toolkit to be helpful. And then just as a reminder, this session will be a bit of a crash course, a bit content heavy, but no need to stress if you miss anything. The webinar and a copy of the slides will be posted alongside the toolkit. And a lot of the information that you see in the slides are within the toolkit as well. This is some of our funding language. And at PCAR, we like to incorporate the rights of learners into our presentations. So these rights include your right to participate, to pass, to be respected. That's from all of us to each other. You have the right to privacy. So please take any time that you might need today. If you need to step away, take a phone call, whatever that might be. Again, these slides will be posted and you'll have access to all of this information. And then the final right is usually to have fun. We know it's hard to think about learning about human trafficking as fun, but regardless, we can create a safe and respectful learning environment. So I know I'm, speaking to the choir here, but we know that schools are one of the few consistent points of contact for youth, and for that youth have outside of their homes, right? And for homeless youth, school is sometimes one of their only consistent points of contact. So, McKinney-Vento liaisons, teachers, counselors, and all other staff are uniquely positioned to notice red flags or indicators, and to intervene early and reduce harm. Because, without an effort to raise awareness of issues like trafficking and other forms of abuse and exploitation, these red flags or indicators can sometimes be missed entirely, or sometimes they might be misinterpreted as behavioral problems, right? So, as we work together to identify and support youth survivors, we can then help break those cycles of exploitation, improve their long-term stability, and overall support their healing and education. So again, anyone, right? Anyone within schools can be equipped to notice these potential indicators that a student might be experiencing abuse or exploitation. We're just going to do a quick poll, but in the chat. So just so we can see, who's all in the room. So just please, take a moment to drop in the chat what your title or your role is, so that we can all see, yeah, what our roles are here today. Okay, social worker, administrator. Okay, great. Counselors, we've got liaisons, director. Yep, all great. And I apologize if you are not captured in this graphic, like coaches and, custodial staff and other support staff. So again, like anyone at school has the opportunity to connect with and support students. And if you click on the link in the chat that takes you to the screening tool, you'll also see a fact sheet, which is essential for any school professionals. It provides just basic information about human trafficking and, most importantly, how to go about referring a student to a school counselor, a homeless liaison, mental health professionals, or other folks who are eligible to provide the screening itself, which we will go over momentarily here. Yeah, this all sounds great. So we knew this toolkit was needed, because of course, the prevalence of trafficking and exploitation of youth within our communities. If you've ever seen movies that depict trafficking, you can understand how one might think, this form of exploitation only happens, across the ocean or somewhere else. You might think of trafficking as this transnational crime where syndicates are bringing victims to and from other countries. And, certainly while this does happen, the reality is that this form of exploitation is happening within our communities. And for survivors, it's often someone they know and trust, right? Um, And although human trafficking can affect anyone, we also know that underrepresented and underserved communities face disproportionately higher risks. For example, 1 in 5 homeless youth are survivors of trafficking. LGBTQ plus youth, BIPOC, and Latinx youth also face significantly higher risks of homelessness, which in turn increases vulnerability to risks of trafficking, right? And then homeless youth overall are 7 times more likely to experience sexual violence. And so, these statistics really underscore the need for folks to pay close attention to students who may be marginalized or are at risk of experiencing abuse or exploitation overall. But as reflect on some of these statistics, just try to think about, some of the populations in your own school and community, who might be at most risk and, what support systems are available to them. So this is a snapshot of our screening toolkit. Again, the link will be in the chat, so feel free to check this out as we go through. So the first thing that we included is a glossary in the toolkit where you will see certain terminology that's important to know along with their definitions. And for the sake of time, we'll just quickly review these. So human trafficking is defined as a crime that involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel another person to engage in commercial sex or forced labor. And so, think of human trafficking as an umbrella term to describe both labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. We also need to, clear up some terminology because some of these terms like exploitation and trafficking or smuggling and trafficking are sometimes used interchangeably, but they are not defined the same way. So trafficking involves the exploitation of people through force, fraud, or coercion. But exploitation is defined as the abuse of a position of vulnerability, which inherently is not illegal. So taking advantage of someone or someone else's resources might be illegal depending on the context, but that doesn't fit the legal definition of trafficking in PA. So when we want to define human trafficking, we want to, carefully consider whether there is force, fraud, or coercion, and if the perpetrator gains something in return of value for the exploitative act. And then, of course, in cases where youth under 18 are found to be engaging in commercial sex, they are considered a trafficking victim regardless if force, fraud, or coercion is proven. Hopefully that sort of helps with the distinction there. I'd also like to point out that human trafficking is very different than human smuggling. So while human smuggling is considered an illicit activity, the act involves transporting someone across international borders. And while the act of smuggling can certainly lead to trafficking victimization, such as the trafficker using debt bondage to obtain labor from the victim, smuggling in itself is not trafficking, right? And then we have online sexual exploitation. This could include, various forms of exploitation, one of which would be like image-based sexual abuse. That includes revenge pornography, non-consensual sexting, and sextortion, which is defined as the threat to expose sexual images in order to make a person do something. And then now we have the term child sexual abuse materials, or CSAM. If you haven't heard of this term before, another word some folks use, especially in the legal field, would be child pornography. But in our work in the anti-sexual violence movement, we learned that CSAM is a much better term to use. Now, I just want you all to take a guess. So, go ahead and put it in the chat. Why do you think we should be using the term CSAM instead of child pornography? And I'll let you think on it. But again, why do you think CSAM is a better term to use? Any guesses? It's not pornography, it's abuse. Yep. Any other guesses? Oh, okay, so yep, exactly. It's not pornography, it's abuse. If we use child pornography, it can sound to the victim as though they are to blame for their victimization, right? And on top of that, the term pornography inherently assumes some form of consent on behalf of the youth, which we know is not possible. So child sexual abuse materials is a much better way of describing that. Okay, so we defined human trafficking, which includes the use of force, fraud, and coercion. So just breaking these down here, force includes the use of violence, sexual assault, physical restraint and imprisonment, monitoring and confinement. And this is to intimidate and control the victim, right? And then fraud includes deception, so like false promises regarding employment or working conditions or love, marriage, or a better life. I've worked with many survivors who thought they were, signing up for something that would help them in one way or another, but then were misled or coerced. So, deception can also be tricking victims into believing that they'll get paid once they start working for the trafficker, right? Or that their family will be taken care of. And then, convincing the victim that authorities should not be trusted is also a way that, traffickers might deceive their victims. And then in the case of, undocumented victims, the trafficker will often use deportation as a threat, or they'll, threaten getting the victim in trouble with the law. And then we have coercion, and coercion includes threats of violence. Relationships can be coercive. So, the trafficker can use emotional manipulation to cause a victim to believe that the trafficker is like romantically interested in them, or sometimes, they'll step in and provide that guardian role in the youth's life, or, cause the victim to see their trafficker as a parental or authority figure in some way. So that already creates the power imbalance. And then religious and cultural beliefs can also be used as a tool of coercion. So that, includes using spiritual or cultural practices, rituals, or deep personal values to compel the victim's obedience. And then you have collusion, which includes forcing victims to participate in illegal activities. This can also be defined as forced criminality. So that could be, forcing a victim to commit visa fraud or theft or prostitution, or recruiting additional victims, which can then in turn cause victims to feel complicit in their traffickers' crimes, right? So those are just some ways that some of the tactics that traffickers use to gain control of their victims. And then potential traffickers, they can be parents, guardians, or other family members. Most trafficking survivors knew and trusted their trafficker before being trafficked. And we know just how prevalent familial sex trafficking is in our communities as well. So traffickers can be romantic partners, they can be friends or acquaintances. Friends or acquaintances can also act as a recruiter. And again, sometimes even the recruiter is unaware of their role or that they are a victim as well in these situations. And then other potential traffickers include pimps or those associated with them, drug dealers or gang members as well. And then employers and agencies such as job placement and modeling agencies. Some of these agencies or fake jobs might show up through online job advertisements or through social media and other online platforms as well. So I'll just quickly review some of the common venues for both labor and sex trafficking. So labor trafficking often happens in jobs like domestic care or home cleaning, in hotels and the hospitality industry, in restaurants, agriculture, construction, and in factories and manufacturing, right? We have lots of egg, chicken, and mushroom farms in Pennsylvania, right? Or, in the construction side of things, I've seen people trafficked into doing roofing and decks. Sorry, my brain just broke for a second. So roofing and decks would be another example there too. But I also want to add that another form of labor trafficking would be, being forced to panhandle as well. So if someone is being coerced or forced into panhandling on the street, and then they're forced to give the money to the trafficker, this is also a form of exploitation as well. So all of these situations can look so different from each other. And I know it can be, overwhelming to think that you need to know all of it in order to spot the signs. But you all already know how to do the work that you do. You're experts in working with the students you work with. So truly, it just comes down to paying attention, taking action if you notice a situation of harm or abuse. And then sex trafficking often occurs in areas like indoor brothels and escort services. It can take place online and through street-based commercial sex. And I also added here that trafficking occurs in homes. And when I say homes, I'm really bringing that important point around that familial trafficking does happen. And people don't need to be taken across state lines or even need to, leave their own homes to be trafficked. And just to elaborate on this a bit further, in 2017, the International Organization for Migration estimated that 41% of child sex trafficking was facilitated by a family member or caretaker. And an important point here is that familial trafficking is unique and it's difficult to identify because it takes place within family networks. And it victimizes children, many of whom are under 12 years of age, so they may not realize that they are victims. And on top of that, children are also inherently loyal and dependent on their family or caretaker structure. So because of that, tightly bound, network of the family, it can make prosecution and identification challenging. So these are some risk factors and protective factors. Risk factors and protective factors generally indicate the risk of experiencing virtually any form of hardship or trauma. So risk factors include unstable or unsupportive relationships through family, work, or other social interactions. One might have a lack of resources, such as food. They might be experiencing housing insecurity as well. There might also be a history of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, such as a history of physical and sexual abuse or other forms of violence within the home that contribute. And then any prevalence of substance use disorders, mental health challenges, or chronic illnesses perpetuate those risks as well. And then protective factors really are just the flip side to the risk factors. They include all of the things that make people's situations, more stable and make them less vulnerable to exploitation overall, such as stable and healthy relationships, having your basic needs met, and access to stable housing. Are we doing okay? We're following. Good. All right. It's a lot of information. So again, don't feel like you need to be like writing everything down, and you're going to have access to all of this. So while there are plenty of identified indicators, it's important to note that, not all indicators that you might see are present in every trafficking situation, and that indicators don't prove or disprove that a trafficking situation is taking place. So again, every situation is unique. No single indicator can prove human trafficking is occurring, but it's important for us to know because it can, potentially open up these conversations. So one thing that Polaris has really pushed for recently, and we couldn't agree more, is the notion that we need to focus on survivor stories instead of only focusing on indicators. So if you'd like to hear some survivor stories, you can check out Polaris online, as they have many videos and interviews of survivors that you can learn from. And then Polaris also points out that indicators can be harmful, and they can lead to stereotyping or put someone in a potentially dangerous situation. Some of these red flags are rooted in stereotypes that are foundationally racist, gendered, and poverty shaming in nature. But again, knowing these indicators might be able to help you identify possible survivors and get them the support they need. But overall, we want to couple that with our understanding of what trafficking situations can look like, which we can learn from survivors directly. Okay, so these are just some of the youth trafficking indicators, and all of these indicators, again, are listed within the screening tool. So some general youth trafficking indicators include if they are experiencing any other crises. They might be vulnerable. They might be like having vulnerabilities, like physical or intellectual disabilities or other mental health concerns. They might have a history of abuse, of homelessness, or running away. If the student is experiencing poverty, if they show signs of neglect or malnutrition, maybe you notice new signs of substance use, or maybe you see changes in their behaviors or their level of participation in school. And then, of course, any youth living in foster care or our systems involved face these higher risks as well. And then some labor trafficking specific indicators would include things like signs of sleep deprivation, if the student is chronically absent, or if you notice that they are engaging in work that's not suitable for their age, or for youth in general. And then any signs that they might be of course, any general signs that, they might be in an abusive situation. And again, these aren't siloed. So, you might notice someone having like signs of sleep deprivation, and you might find out they're a sex trafficking survivor. So these, while they indicate some of these specific things like labor trafficking versus sex trafficking, a lot of these overlap as well. And then for specifically sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation, some of these indicators include, if the student seems anxious or fearful when you're talking to them, like, they might be avoiding eye contact, when speaking to them about what's going on, if it seems like they don't feel safe to speak freely, maybe they might have certain answers where, you might think, this isn't something that this student would say, right? Maybe it sounds like someone coached them, that sort of thing. And then, if they exhibit high risk sexual behavior, or if you notice them using terms that are often used in the commercial sex industry, like the life, the game, Johns, which are like sex buyers, or tricks. And then, any indication that they are in a relationship with an older adult. For example, you might notice, they suddenly have all these new clothes and other things that indicate they've been, receiving gifts regularly. All of these potential indicators all of these are potential indicators of commercial sexual exploitation. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to pop that in the chat. Oh, thank you, Taylor, for putting that in. And then we have online sexual exploitation. So these are just some indicators of, again, online sexual exploitation and sextortion as well. So some physical or behavioral indicators might include a sudden avoidance or sudden increase in technology use. They might be overprotective of their devices and accounts. Some emotional or mental indicators might include any indication of depression or anxiety. They might seem emotionally distant or on edge. You also might notice some new indications of self-harm or eating disorders as well. And the thing I'll say about online sexual exploitation, it is one of those things that often happens very fast. For example, with sextortion, I think there was one study that said like the average time of communication between the victim and the sextortion offender was like 2 weeks. Like they connect online, they gather information about you, they build a relationship, and pretty quickly it turns into threats. And so you can see that. I guess those signs of anxiety around the situation a little more prominently than something like trafficking and exploitation, because we know that that's more of a chronic long-term of situation sometimes. So, but with online sexual exploitation, again, it's really fast and intense, and it happens. That's why we have so many issues of suicide with sextortion survivors as well. And so again, all of these indicators we reviewed, don't necessarily prove something's going on, but just, it's good to keep in mind, and it might lead to opening up a conversation with youth who might be experiencing an abusive or harmful situation overall. So, reporting human trafficking, these instructions are also in the screening tool and in the fact sheet. So if you suspect trafficking is happening, you can follow, of course, your mandated reporting requirements. You can also make an additional report to the PA State Police Human Trafficking Hotline. And then you can also work to connect the survivor with further services and support. Of course, there are are, some things to keep in mind during the reporting process, which we'll talk about in a moment here. But some of that particularly is around, maintaining trust with the student and avoiding re-traumatization. Okay, so some general recommendations for school staff and general school staff. If you're not if you're not eligible to provide the screening directly, if you're like a teacher or a coach, for example, we recommend using the fact sheet for reference, and then connecting the student with the appropriate person to conduct a screening. And of course, if trafficking or abuse is suspected, you can follow your mandated reporting requirements.
Not based off this RR then, is it?
And then, so any school-based mental health professionals, social workers, McKinney-Vento liaisons, nurses, and school counselors are all eligible to provide the screening. There are some recommended webinars that are on the screening toolkit that take a deeper dive into topics like how to talk to youth about trafficking, or meeting the specific mental health needs of survivors. So you can, of course, take some time to review before conducting screening. And those are all listed in the toolkit again. But again, I do want to acknowledge that, you all already know how to provide this level of support and you have your protocols in place. This is really just a snapshot of the best practices and what researchers recommend on, narrowing our practices to meet the particular needs of at-risk youth and survivors of trafficking. Okay, so we have some important tips listed on the toolkit before the actual screening section, but we'll unpack these together. So first is to ensure a confidential space like a counselor's office or empty classroom to conduct the screening. This is to ensure the student's confidentiality and to build trust. And then, be sure to review any relevant information about the student before speaking with them. Like, what do you know about their home life? Are there things that, may help you connect the dots? For example, if I know that the student has IDD, and I know the complexities of having IDD, then, I would have an easier time understanding them. And so, taking the time to know like who you're going to be speaking with will actually reduce implicit bias on our end, and it helps us understand the student overall. So hopefully that makes sense. And of course, if the student has any support needs like language interpretation, it's just a reminder there to arrange those services. And then make sure to review all of the screening instructions and the assessment questions before meeting with the student. And, while speaking with the student, you can also reword or rephrase questions to include, age-appropriate language, or in a way that the student can understand better. For example, I'm not just going to come outright and ask like, are you being trafficked? Or, even like, is someone forcing you to do X, Y, and Z? I mean, obviously, every situation is different. And so you might learn something that has happened that, does warrant certain questions to gauge their safety. But otherwise, I might say something along the lines of, hey, I noticed you've been really tired lately. Is something keeping you up? So just, beginning with general questions that allow for an opportunity to connect with the student in a way that, doesn't feel scary or interrogating. Of course, doing any sort of screening and questions in an interview, we don't want that student to feel that way. But with these more open-ended questions, we can sort of move the conversation from there. And then it's also important to remember that youth are not, they may not self-identify as trafficked, right? Instead, they might say something like, well, I was helping out a friend. Or, they might say like, I feel like I don't have a choice, or, I'm just doing what I need to do to survive. And that might not so like they might not see themselves as a victim. Oftentimes, especially with traumatic situations like this, it can take years for survivors to even fully understand what happened to them, which is, of course, where some of the education piece comes in. Um, and then, lastly, this last important tip here is, of course, to shred any notes or delete information that you might have written down for the purpose of reporting a suspected trafficking situation. And this is to maintain confidentiality outside of the specific report that you might need to make. Hmm. Okay, so on the last slide, I said that we need to arrange for a confidential space, right? Like a classroom or a counseling room, right? But we also need to create a safe space, which is essentially a space where the potential survivor can express all emotions, and the student knows that they can receive unconditional support. And it's a space where, we are intentionally non-judgmental. And then we all know how to use our active listening skills and, responding with reflection and clarification. Another important tip here is to explain your role and how the screening will go before starting to talk to the student. Explain your mandated reporting requirements before asking any questions so that they can provide you that informed consent, right? And then, of course, explain to the student that the screening is voluntary and confidential, of course, outside of the mandated reporting requirements. And then another aspect of relationship building in situations where we're talking to potential survivors is being aware of how trauma affects youth. And again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we also know it's important to remember that many trafficking survivors experience the symptoms of complex PTSD. And so some of the triggers for CPTSD include feeling threatened, vulnerable, or frightened, feeling shameful, feeling a lack of control or any unexpected changes. So there are a number of things that we can do to avoid potentially re-traumatizing the survivor during this process, such as, addressing any concerns raised by the student before and during the screening, and seeing what types of support can be offered to the student throughout the reporting process as well. And then we can also avoid potentially triggering or re-traumatizing by asking only what is necessary, which is also called minimal fact interviewing. So when doing the screening and interviewing a potential survivor of trafficking or exploitation, we really are just trying to gauge their potential safety and support needs. And the purpose of the screening tool is not just to obtain disclosure, right? So regardless of whether human trafficking indicators are observed in this scenario, we can use this tool to guide our conversation with the student to gauge their safety, their education, and support needs overall. So we know so that we know what kind of additional resources or assistance that we can work on to arrange for the student. Right, I hope everyone's doing okay so far. And hopefully, what I'm sharing is making sense. But again, you don't need to be an expert in this. There are always people and resources you can lean on when navigating these types of situations. I know it can feel, overwhelming to feel like you need to be a hero in every situation or keep your eyes peeled. But please, remember to take care of yourself and know that this is never a one-person effort. It takes all of us to, continue informing, raising awareness, so that we can all, potentially see those signs. Again, these resources are, at your fingertips, and you can always reach out to victim service advocates within your community for additional advice or support. They could potentially even meet you at the school to provide additional support throughout the process. So now that we've got, all of the background information and important tips down, it's good to start again with some open-ended questions, like I said before, because it would really help gauging the student's potential, safety and support needs overall. And it allows you to have a conversation that can help the student, not feel any sort of like heightened anxiety throughout the process. So you can say things like, how do you take care of yourself when you're hungry or you need a place to stay? Where do you feel safe? Who do you feel safe to be around? So these again are just some examples, but you already know how to talk to the youth that you work with. So really it's just about, meeting a potential survivor where they're at and even working to reduce the power imbalance between you and the student so that you can maintain that trust, if that makes sense. And then again, all of this is listed in the screening tool. These are just some of the recommended steps to take if the student answers yes to the screening questions, or provides additional detail that lets you know it's time to make a report. Of course, the first thing you want to do is focus on their safety and support needs, and then make the required reports to Childline. And then you can also reach out to the Pennsylvania State Police Human Trafficking Hotline to report if necessary, as well. You can contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline for additional resources and information. Also to your local programs, you can connect the student with an advocate if they'd like to speak to them. You can reach out to your local crisis center, rape crisis center or domestic violence center for additional support. They have 24-hour hotlines and specialized services that extend not only to the survivor, but to their family as well. So they can, also help with shelter and housing programs. There are, they are also equipped to provide support to trafficking survivors. So it's always good to make a connection with your local center if you haven't already. And then just the last reminder here is to, again, shred any notes or delete information that you may have written down in that scenario. And then here are some of the screening questions. We won't go through every single one because maybe you can take the time to look at them or follow along if you'd like. But you'll notice that a lot of these questions are written in a way to be relatable, but also broad enough that you might be able to create an opportunity for the student to open up about potentially other situations of harm or abuse, instead of just answering yes or no to trafficking specific questions and leaving it at that, right? So this provides an opportunity to gauge whether other things might be happening. So for example, one of them includes this question of, sometimes young people who face challenges in meeting their basic needs, such as accessing food, clothing, shelter, protection, or other needs, they might find themselves pressured or forced by others to engage in activities like exchanging sex or sexual acts for those needs. Have you experienced this, or are you in a situation where you think this could happen? And you don't need to read this aloud word for word, right? You don't even need to ask every single question. It will all depend on what you already know and how you can potentially rephrase some of these to relate to the student more. So, I see the way these questions are phrased on the toolkit as a detailed reminder to us as screeners, what potential situations can look like. So, for example, if I was going through this screening with a student, let's say I know, they have been couch surfing, I might say something like, so you've been staying at some friends' houses. Do they make you feel safe and welcome? Sometimes people are told to work around the house or do things in exchange for staying somewhere. Have you ever dealt with something like this? So that's just an example, but it will come naturally to you, during that process because you'll potentially have more information to base the conversation off of, and some background on the concern, right? And then this is the Human Trafficking Power and Control Wheel. It is a great tool to use in helping students or their families understand how trafficking and exploitation works. And in situations like this, where we are educating on issues like trafficking, we want to avoid the sensationalized or scare tactic kind of messaging, and simply just talk to them about what exploitation looks like, what it means to be taken advantage of. For example, you can offer examples of exploitation like job offers that seem too good to be true, or maybe like an online romantic relationship that moves too fast, right? So you can bring sort of examples like that up, just to show what exploitation or being taken advantage of looks like. So the outer ring of this power and control wheel identifies various venues and places where trafficking can take place. And then on the inside, you can see how traffickers use power and control over their victims through tactics like intimidation, threats, isolation, and other forms of abuse. And it expands on those points. Now, while I did primarily work with adults, I've used this tool often to help trafficking survivors sort of understand like what defines it. And it was somewhat common for survivors to come into the Victim Services Center seeking services for domestic violence, for example. And then after some time, we would realize through our conversation that this person was actually getting trafficked. And so, I would highly recommend having this handy as well. Okay, so we discussed all of the things that we should do and be mindful of, but sometimes it can be helpful to talk about what we shouldn't do as well, right? So if a youth survivor discloses a potential trafficking situation or situation of abuse, we can be mindful in avoiding judgment or overreacting or potentially crossing the student's boundaries or triggering them. So just some examples here would be, we can remove phrases like, I told you so, and instead say, what they did is a crime. Or this is why you shouldn't, and instead say things like this isn't your fault. And so really just taking time to maintain that trust, right? Another example would be, thank you for trusting me with this, or, are you ready to reach out for help together? So hopefully, that kind of frames things in a different way. So, what do youth survivors need? Survivors need to be believed, right? If they are not believed, they will not feel trusted. I mean, they will not feel trustworthy of anyone. They won't want to talk to anybody about these things. So we really want to believe survivors. we also know survivors need autonomy. They need someone they can trust, right? So we really focus on this piece because it's important to support survivors in taking agency over their own healing journey. Because sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is simply to just check in regularly and let that student know that you care, and that they'll always know that there's someone that they can go to, right? Okay, so we have a couple of case studies here. I'll just read aloud the story to you, and then there are some questions that we'll review, and you can pop your answers into the chat. So Sophia is in high school. Her favorite class is science. She loves hanging out in the school library with her friends, and she's head over heels for Joey, a sophomore who just moved to town. Sophia's parents are going through a divorce, which has caused a great deal of emotional stress, so much that Sophia hates the idea of going home after school. She begins seeing the school counselor regularly to discuss what she is experiencing at home. Joey, the new student who moved to town, becomes friends with Victoria. They really hit it off, right? They connect on Snapchat, Instagram, and they begin to text and call each other every day. After building a romantic connection and a sense of trust, Sophia opens up to Joey about her parents' divorce, and he listens and provides support. He tells her he'll do anything for her, and if anything, he loves her more than her parents do. After some time, Joey asks Sophia for nude photos. Sophia complies because she trusts Joey. Joey screenshots the photos and tells Sophia he must do favors for him or else he will release the photos to her family and friends and post them online. To avoid getting in trouble, Sophia sneaks out every night and goes to Joey's house, where she is coerced into having sex with his friends in exchange for money. Eventually, Sophia begins to miss school more often, and her friends increasingly become worried for her. So again, you can pop some of these in the chat. What were some of the victim's vulnerabilities? Let's start with that one. Do you remember certain things about Sophia that might indicate her vulnerabilities? Yep. Her parents are going through a divorce. It's causing stress. Exactly. And then what changes have happened in the victim's life? We can also say like the divorce. We can also point out that this new boy came into town and they're hitting it off. That's a new change that, caused sort of that path down before getting trafficked. And then another question here, how did the trafficker exploit those vulnerabilities? Right. Preyed on her emotions. Yep. Says that he loves her more than her parents do. So built that connection, that trust, right? Sorry, I'm like flipping back and forth. And then who in the victim's life could have noticed these changes? I'll go back. School counselor and friends. Yep. Guidance counselor. She said her favorite class is science. So maybe her science teacher could have noticed things, right? Librarian, exactly. She hangs out in the library with her friends. Good. This is good. Yep. Exactly. And of course, anyone could be potentially equipped to notice these things. But with Sophia, we know she has these regular points of contact with certain adults that can be, trusted adults in her life. And then, yes, how could the victim's peers have noticed these changes? Yeah, they could have, we know like they could have also told one of those trusted adults, right? A counselor, a teacher, a librarian, anybody. Okay, great. Right, then we have Liam, a different form of a different style of this case study. So there aren't really questions here, but we can still review together. So Liam misses school often, and sometimes talks about having to work late at night to earn money, right? Teachers have noticed him falling asleep and skipping lunch. And then one teacher overheard him saying he sometimes works until 2 or 3 a.m. The teacher referred Liam to the homeless liaison for a screening and relays their concerns. And when asked more about the work that he does, Liam indicates that he is worried if he stops working, he won't have a place to sleep. He also feels like he can't quit because, the restaurant owner says he owes them for letting him stay in a room above the restaurant. And additionally, Liam also says that he doesn't always get paid what he's promised, and is sometimes given food instead of payment. So clearly there is some indication in Liam's story that he's being exploited by an older adult. Sounds like, his boss at the restaurant. And, we know he mentioned excessive work hours. He's sometimes not paid what he's promised. And he's restricted by this person that he works for, thinking that he can't quit or walk away from the situation. And on top of that, he's entirely dependent on this housing arrangement, which maintains the power of the potential trafficker over Liam. And so, the recommendations on maintaining trust with the student while also making a mandated report would be helpful in this scenario. And then again, seeing what other support systems are necessary and what community partners you can connect with. And then these are some commonly asked questions around screening toolkits. We have them listed in the toolkit as well with their answers. But basically, this screening tool should be used with the consent of the potential survivor. And if you recognize signs or indicators of trafficking and abuse, and then if you notice some indicators but it's determined ultimately that the student is not a trafficking survivor, just, overall work to address those other safety needs. And of course, if it's a potential situation of abuse, follow your mandated reporting requirements. And lastly, any suspected trafficking should be reported, regardless of whether the situation occurred in or outside of the US. And if you ever need access to additional resources like victim services, legal services, housing, or shelter programs, again, you can contact your local rape crisis center or domestic violence center. And you can also call 211 for specialized services or needs that you may not know where to access. And then lastly, this is just the list of webinars for a deeper dive on strategies and how to build a protocol. And the webinar resources are from the National Center for Safe and Supporting Learning Environments. And Oh, where'd it go? I was supposed to have a screenshot of the pair tool here, but the pair tool is also linked below.
Perfect. It's like I've never seen this kid smile.
The pair tool is linked at the bottom here, and it's like a 3-page screening tool, but at the bottom page of that tool, there is like a fillable page where you can put your local services, like your local LGBTQ center, your local homeless shelters, and then it also has some like national hotline information as well. So it's helpful to check out. Okay, I know that that was a lot of information all at once, and we're a little early here, but hopefully, reviewing the screening tool will provide you with the information you need to feel prepared for situations like this. But, as we close out this session, remember that you are, oh, sorry, my cat wanted to say hi. Just remember that, you all are not alone in this work, right? There are local partners, hotlines, and resources available, and you can always reach out to me with questions or, navigating certain issues as well. And lastly, thank you so much for your commitment and your time supporting youth and all survivors. And again, please feel free to, reach out. My contact information is here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Sozan. We really appreciate you sharing all of this information with us this morning. I did we did have one question in the chat that I wanted to highlight, and then we can, of course, open it up for further questions as well. But we had someone in the chat asking, when saying that we should shred all notes, information about human trafficking, besides information we are actively sending to Childline, on the school's end, we normally maintain our records for the expected duration, which is about 6 years, and includes copies of Childline reports. Are we able to keep these records, or should we not maintain them after submitting the report? And then there's like a part 2 to the question.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And then, go ahead. I'll let you answer that part first before we.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, if you have already protocols in place to store some of this information, please continue following those protocols. This is really just to reduce any information getting lost somewhere, and it's also a good reminder that like what is said in that space stays in that space. I've heard, like, for example, I've heard situations where like survivors have come out and said, all the teachers knew that my nudes got sent across the school, and how just embarrassing that might feel for them. So just like knowing that, I guess like that, what's it called? Ensuring the survivor that like that information stays there and they're not going to be, ridiculed, or there's not going to be any gossip around it, right? So that kind of secures the information. But again, if you have that protocol in place to store Childline reports, absolutely, please continue doing that.
Thanks, Ozan. And that's a good example too of securing student survivors confidentiality. In addition to that question, so I guess this is kind of like a best practice. What does this look like for email forwarding those reports to administration or other, other staff or personnel that should, be in the know of those when those situations do arise?
Yeah, I would say, maybe like, let's say if the child report had a significantly more detail, and that detail isn't necessarily important for the other staff in the school to know, you can reduce some of that detail and be more general about what might have happened to the student, and really focusing on the student's support needs in that situation. But yeah, I think that kind of covers that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I didn't see any other questions in the chat, but we'll stay open here for a moment. If I know it's a lot to digest, so giving folks a minute if they need to drop their question. in the chat, or we welcome you to come off mute as well. And you can ask your question that way. I did also just drop the evaluation link in for Act 48 credits, and just a shameless plug that we hope you join us next month, October 8th, for our next webinar as well.
Yeah, again, we'll be posting all of these with, tools that were talked about in this chat, in this session as well. So I'll have links. Can you give examples how some questions may be helpful with younger students, younger than 8 years? I know that there are some of the links for webinars will go do a deeper dive into how to talk to youth about trafficking in general. Like one of them is specifically on just terminology and how to use that. I haven't worked with children of that age, so I can't give the, adequate advice, I think. But again, you know how to talk to them. And so it's really just rephrasing these questions and your understanding and delivering it back to them in a way that, they might be able to understand without like creating any fear. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, the links in this toolkit have webinars that would be able to give you a more in-depth advice on that. And then, yes, the PowerPoint will be shared. All the slides and links to tools and resources will be posted alongside the toolkit and fact sheet.
Well, we appreciate everyone joining us. Thank you so much. Again, we hope you join us next month, October 8th. We'll hang out here in the room for just a few moments more, but we hope you have a good, it's Wednesday, right? Wednesday, yes. So have a good Wednesday. We're almost to Friday. So appreciate you all taking the time to be with us this morning. We'll give it about another minute or two. We'll let folks.
Thank you so much, everyone. And hopefully you get some of your time back.
Oh, here's another question from Melissa.
No, Childline, I don't think they automatically make a report to PSP's Human Trafficking Hotline. That is a good question, yeah. So PSP's hotline actually just recently launched, I believe earlier this year. So I don't think Childline has like a protocol in place to do that. And I would also say that, Childline is like obviously the mandatory aspect of this, and talk to the student about reporting this to PSP's hotline, and obviously get their like consent before doing that.
Yeah, really good question. Learning something new today as well.
Thanks
always.
So much.
Oh, yay. Thanks, Laura.
I really hope, you all can benefit from this screening tool and the resources alongside it, and hopefully it'll, help you feel more prepared for potential situations like this.